He stole my dead husband's medal. Then I called my son.
The Tuesday morning light came through the kitchen window, the way it always had in October, slow and pale, falling in a long rectangle across the floor and climbing the far wall by the time Ruth Calloway finished her first cup of coffee. She filled the second cup and set it on George's side of the table. She had done this every morning for 11 years, not out of confusion and not out of forgetting. She knew exactly which chair was empty. She filled the cup anyway and sat down with her own and looked at the window and let the morning be what it was. Outside, the maple tree in the front yard had gone deep red overnight. October in Millhaven, Tennessee moved at the pace of a town that had seen enough October to stop being surprised by them. Ruth was 78 years old. Her hair had gone fully white in her early 60s, and she had let it because George always said it suited her better than the brown ever had. She wore it pinned back the way she had worn it for 50 years. She was small and compact, the way women become small and compact after decades of hard work, not fragile but dense, like something that had been tested repeatedly and had simply held. On the table beside her cup sat a crossword puzzle, half finished from Sunday night, a blue pen, a folded grocery list. By the door hung a tan coat with 2 good buttons and a worn hem she had been meaning to fix since last spring. She drank slowly. The house at the end of Sycamore Lane was everything a house should be and nothing more than that. A porch swing that creaked on the left side, 2 rocking chairs facing the yard. Inside, 40 years of a life arranged with the kind of care that comes from knowing where everything belongs and putting it there every time. Bookshelves along the wall of the sitting room, a piano no one played anymore but no one would move, a kitchen that smelled of cedar and recent baking even on mornings when nothing had been baked. George had built the back porch himself in the summer of 1981. Boone had been 7 years old and handed his father nails one at a time with great seriousness. Ruth looked at the empty cup on the other side of the table. She picked up her pen and filled in 3 squares of the crossword. Then she set the pen down, folded the puzzle into her bag, and put on the tan coat. Tuesday was Meatloaf Day. She had walked the same route to Sullivan's Diner every Tuesday for 51 years. Down Sycamore Lane to the end left on Birch Right on Main, past the hardware store and the pharmacy and the small brick building that used to be a savings and loan and was now a place that sold candles. 4 blocks, 12 minutes at her pace, which had slowed perhaps 2 minutes from what it had been at 30. The town knew her. She had taught nearly half of it. 5th grade, 41 years at Millhaven Elementary. She had taught the pharmacist and the woman who ran the hardware store and Dex Briggs, who had been cooking at Sullivan's Diner since before his hair went gray. She had taught Deputy Kurt Lassiter, though she tried not to dwell on that particular fact before noon. You could not walk 4 blocks in Millhaven without passing someone Ruth Calloway had given a failing grade to at some point. Most of them had grown up grateful for it. She walked at her pace. She carried her grocery bag. She thought about George as she always did on Tuesdays. He had been a quiet man with steady hands and a way of fixing things that was almost meditative, not just objects but moments. When something in the house broke, he would sit with it a while before picking up a tool. When something in a conversation went wrong, he did the same. She had loved that about him from the first year, and she had loved it from the last year. And she missed it now in ways that had no adequate words, even after 11 years of trying to find them. George Calloway had been born in 1932 in Harlan County, Kentucky, the 3rd son of a coal miner who believed in 2 things with equal conviction: hard work and silence. George had inherited both. He enlisted at 18, shipped to Korea in 1951, and came back in 1953 with a piece of shrapnel in his left shoulder that the surgeons decided was safer to leave in place, and a brown paper envelope he would not open in front of anyone for 17 years. They had married in 1970. Ruth had been 24. George had been 38. People in town had said things quietly the way people in small towns said things. Ruth had not cared then and had not cared since. On their wedding night, he opened the brown envelope. He sat on the edge of the bed in the lamplight and held the medal for a long time before he handed it to her. A silver star, his name on the back and a date she had since memorized, and words about valor in the face of enemy fire that George had never in 43 years of marriage fully explained, and she had never fully pressed him on. "I do not deserve to wear this anymore," he said, "but I want you to keep it safe." She wore it the next morning. She wore it every morning since. Under her sweater against her skin, warm against her collarbone, a constant small weight like a hand resting there. For 54 years, it had been the first thing she felt when she dressed, and the last thing she felt when she lay down and every moment in between. The night before he died, a Sunday in March 2013, the room smelling of antiseptic and old wood, and the lilacs Boone had brought because he remembered those were her favorites. George had looked at the chain at her throat and spoken 4 words without preamble. Do not let anyone. He had not finished the sentence. He had not needed to. She did not take the medal off the morning of his funeral. She did not take it off at Christmas that year, or the next, or the one after that. She wore it now this Tuesday morning in October under a cotton blouse and the tan coat with the worn hem, walking to Sullivan's diner for meatloaf. Dex Briggs saw her coming through the plate glass window behind the counter, the way he always did on Tuesdays. He was 62 years old and had been cooking at Sullivan's since he was 26. He had known Ruth Calloway most of his life, first as the woman who taught him 5th grade and gave him a C- he had frankly deserved, and then as the woman who had been George's closest friend for nearly 30 years after they met at a veterans gathering in Knoxville in 1984 and discovered they had both served in Korea and both believed in the same brand of silence and the same brand of loyalty. Dex had a son once. His name had been Danny. Dex did not think about that on most Tuesday mornings because thinking about it on Tuesday mornings made the rest of the day impossible, and he had a dinner service to run. He pushed it to the back of a shelf the way a man pushes something he cannot deal with right now, and he watched Ruth Calloway cross Main Street and raised a hand through the window. She raised one back. She came through the door and took the 3rd booth on the left, the one she always took, the one with the window facing the alley because she had always liked to watch the light change on brick. Dex had her coffee on the counter before she had her coat off. 3 sugars. He knew. She ordered without looking at the menu. She never looked at the menu. He brought the meatloaf and went back to the kitchen without conversation, because Ruth Calloway did not need conversation with her Tuesday lunch. She needed quiet and meatloaf and the crossword, and after 51 years of Tuesdays, Dex understood this the way he understood how long to leave gravy on the stove. She ate slowly. She worked the crossword. Outside the window, Main Street moved at its usual October pace. A pickup truck, a woman with a stroller, 2 boys on bicycles. The light on the alley brick moved from yellow to gold as the afternoon shifted. She had lived in this town her whole life, except for 4 years at college in Nashville, and she had known for most of that time that it was not a perfect place. No place was. Millhaven had a way of being generous to the people it knew and invisible to the ones it had stopped noticing. And as Ruth had grown older, she had become aware that she was crossing some invisible line. People held doors for her because she was old, not because she was Mrs. Calloway. People said her name with vague warmth that suggested they recognized it rather than that they knew her. She had not told Boone about any of this. She had not told him about the grocery store last winter when the man with the cart had pushed it into her hip, not by accident, she was fairly certain though. She had told herself on the walk home that she might have been wrong. She had not told him about the man at the post office in April who had used a word she would not repeat. She had not told him about the 3 mornings in September when beer cans had appeared in the front yard, one of them rolling up against the porch step, the sour smell of it sharp in the morning air. She had not told him because Boone would come, and when Boone came 44, motorcycles came with him. And she had made him a promise the morning he left 32 years ago, and she intended to keep her end of it. No trouble on my porch, she had told him. He had been 18 years old and the motorcycle was secondhand and the road ahead was long, and she had kissed his forehead the way you kiss someone when you are trying to put everything you know about love into a single gesture before they are gone. No trouble on my porch, Boone. I promised Mama. He had kept that promise every year since. She intended to keep hers. She finished the crossword, left a precise tip put on her coat, and walked out of Sullivan's diner at 2:47 in the afternoon, heading for the grocery 3 blocks east. 2 cans of tomatoes and a box of salt crackers, the particular brand George had always liked, that she still bought sometimes for no reason she could fully explain. She did not see the red pickup until she turned into the alley behind the diner. She always used the alley on Tuesdays because it connected to Birch Street and saved 4 minutes on the walk home. 2 metal pins in her left hip from a fall in the spring made 4 minutes matter in a way they had not always mattered, though she would not have said this to anyone who asked. The truck had no license plates. She noticed that first. Then she noticed the music had cut off. Then she noticed 3 doors opening at the same time. She did not run. She was 78 years old and she had 2 pins in her hip. And even if neither of those things had been true, she was not a woman who ran from things. She turned around slowly with her grocery bag held against her chest, and she looked at the 3 men coming toward her. The one in front was large in the way that men become large when size has been a tool long enough to feel like identity. Bald head, sleeveless flannel over a thermal despite the October cold, a jaw that looked like it had absorbed considerable punishment. His name was Harlan Stokes, though she did not know that yet, and he had a record in 2 states and a smile that used everything on his face except his eyes. He grinned at her the way a man grins when he has already decided how something ends. The second man had a thin red beard and a wallet on a chain and moved to her right with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. The third one stayed by the truck. Young, perhaps 25, laughing a laugh that was performance rather than pleasure, arms crossed like a man who had agreed to be somewhere and was beginning to question the terms. "Nice coat," the first one said. Ruth said nothing. She slid 1 foot back. She kept her eyes on his face. 41 years in front of a classroom had taught her that the first thing you lose when you look away is the room. She did not look away. "Bet you got cash in that purse. I'm late for an errand," Ruth said. Her voice was steady. It was the voice she had used for test days and parent conferences and the afternoon in 1994 when a boy had brought something dangerous to school and she had walked him calmly to the principal's office with one hand on his shoulder as though they were simply taking a stroll. He laughed. It was a short, ugly sound with nothing behind it. He stepped forward. The smell of bourbon came off him like heat off a stove, thick and stale, the smell of an afternoon that had been going wrong since before noon. He reached out and flicked her grocery bag with one finger. The bag tore at the handle. The 2 cans of tomatoes hit the asphalt and rolled. The box of crackers split open at the corner. She did not look at the groceries. She looked at him. His hand came up. He grabbed the collar of her coat with one fist and lifted. Her feet scraped the asphalt. She felt the cold dumpster at her back and his knuckles pressing against the chain at her throat. The silver chain. He felt it at the same moment she became conscious of it, that shift in his attention, his eyes dropping from her face to her collarbone, and something in his expression changed. The grin became something slower and more deliberate. "Well now," he said. He pulled the chain. George had bought the strongest clasp they made at a jeweler in Knoxville in 1970, and it held for 3 full seconds before it gave. The sound it made was very small. Ruth had heard larger sounds cause less damage. He held the metal up between them, dangling it from the broken chain the way a man dangles keys when he wants you to understand he has them. The October light caught the face of it, Silver Star, George Calloway's name on the back. She did not scream. "Please," she said. Just the word. "Please," what the man said. He swung it slowly. "You going to call your big, strong husband?" "My husband is dead," Ruth said. "Then who are you going to call?" She did not answer. She reached one hand into her purse slowly, deliberately, so the reaching could be seen and understood as deliberate. Her fingers found the phone. Old. A flip phone with a crack down the right side of the screen that she had never replaced because she only ever needed one number to be fast. The man saw the phone and laughed louder. "Go ahead. Call the cops. We will be 3 counties over before they finish the paperwork." She opened the phone. Her thumb shook once, a single small tremor, then went steady. She pressed and held the number 2. The line connected on the first ring. She did not say hello. She did not say his name. She held the phone up between herself and the man who was holding George's medal, and she let the person on the other end hear what was happening. A voice came through the speaker, older than the man in front of her, quieter, the kind of quiet that has considerable weight behind it. "Mama." The man with the bald head snorted and said something to the one with the red beard. They laughed. Ruth looked at the phone. "Boone," she said, "I need you to come home." A pause. Short. Less than 2 seconds. But she had raised this boy, and she knew the texture of his silences, the way she knew the texture of every room in this house. This particular silence had edges. "Where are you? The diner? Are you hurt?" She paused. The man still had his fist in her coat collar. The metal still swung from his other hand. The man with the red beard was going through her purse. The young one by the truck had stopped laughing. A little, she said. The line went very still, not silent. She could hear him breathing, could hear behind him what might have been wind or engines or both outdoor sounds of a man who was always somewhere in motion. Then came two words spoken quietly, and the call ended. Stay put. She closed the phone. She slipped it back into her purse with the same deliberateness with which she had removed it. She looked up at the man holding the silver star, and she did something that she could see confused him. She could watch the confusion move across his face. She smiled, not warmly and not with fear. It was the smile of a woman who had stood at the front of a classroom for 4 decades and had watched hundreds of times the moment when a child who believed they were winning began to understand they were not. A patient smile, a tired one. The smile of someone who already knows how something ends and is simply waiting for everyone else to arrive there. The man started to say something. That was when the county cruiser rolled past the mouth of the alley, white and brown. The decal on the door. Ruth recognized it before she could see the driver clearly, the way you recognize a walk or a silhouette after enough years of watching it cross your doorway. Kurt Lassiter had been in her 5th grade class in 1989. He had been a difficult student not because he lacked intelligence, which he did not, but because he had understood from an early age that rules applied differently depending on who was paying attention. She had given him a D in conduct 2 years running and written on his report card, in the careful cursive she still used in birthday cards, Kurt is capable of much more than he currently chooses. She had believed it when she wrote it. She was less certain now. Lassiter glanced into the alley. The motion was casual, reflexive, the habit of a man whose job required him to look. He looked. He saw the red truck with no plates. He saw the 3 men. He saw Ruth Calloway pressed against a dumpster with a large man's fist in her coat collar and her feet barely touching the ground. He saw all of it. He raised 2 fingers off the steering wheel. Not at her, at Harlan Stokes. The easy wave of a man greeting someone he knew. Then the cruiser rolled forward, tires crossing the alley grate, and turned onto Birch Street and was gone. Something cold settled into Ruth's chest. Not fear. She had moved past fear in the first 30 seconds. Something more precise. The confirmation of a thing she had suspected and had not wanted to know. The 3 men relaxed. Harlan lowered the metal slightly and examined it again with the comfort of a man who has been reminded the room belongs to him. The one with the red beard found $11 in her wallet and made a dismissive sound. The young one walked away from the truck, at last, hands in his pockets. The performance of boredom switched back on. Harlan told his companions to take the wallet and discussed briefly whether to take the station wagon. Ruth did not react to any of this. She smoothed the front of her coat with both hands, feeling where the collar had been pulled out of shape, and she bent slowly, carefully, with attention to her hip, and picked up one of the tomato cans from the asphalt. She set it on the lid of the dumpster. She picked up the second one and set it beside it. She straightened her glasses. Then she walked 3 steps to the wooden bench beside the diner's back door and sat down. She folded her hands in her lap. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth the way she had taught children to breathe before standardized tests. The 3 men watched her and did not understand what they were seeing. You could observe it on their faces, the vague unease of men whose script has departed from the expected. People who have been robbed in alleys do not generally sit down on benches and fold their hands. Harlan shrugged and turned back to the wallet. Inside Sullivan's diner, behind the service window that looked over the alley, Dex Briggs had his back pressed against the wall beside the reach-in freezer. His phone was already in his hand. He had been watching through the gap in the service window from the moment the red truck turned in. He had seen everything, including the cruiser, including what Lassiter had done. He did not call the county sheriff's office. He had a number saved in his phone for 15 years. He had put it there after a conversation with George Calloway in the parking lot of a veterans meeting in 2009, when George had pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand and said, "If anything ever happens that the county cannot handle, you call this first." Dex had transferred it to 3 different phones over the years and never once used it and never once deleted it. And in the last several months, he had found himself looking at it sometimes on slow Tuesday afternoons when Ruth came in for her meatloaf and he watched her walk back out to the alley and disappear alone the way she was always alone. He pressed the contact. Iron Road, Boone. 2 rings. Dex told him in 8 sentences what had happened and where and who was present and what Lassiter had done. He spoke quietly and without panic. He was already filming through the gap in the service window. As he spoke, the phone angled by feel the way a man aims something when he cannot look at what he is aiming at. Boone said 4 words and ended the call. "We are coming now." Outside, Ruth sat on the bench and held her hands in her lap and looked at the 2 tomato cans on the dumpster lid. She was thinking about George. She was thinking about the weight of the metal against her collarbone, the absence of it now, and the way 11 years of wearing a thing makes its absence a physical fact, like a tooth gone, like a hand that reaches for a coffee cup that has already been moved. She was thinking about his hands. The afternoon light moved across the alley brick. The 3 men talked among themselves, no longer paying close attention to her, which was their mistake and also her relief. She needed them to keep not paying attention. She needed 12 more minutes. She heard it before she heard it. This is a thing that happens with large engines in sufficient number. There is a frequency that arrives before the sound, something you feel in the soles of your feet, in the base of your chest, like the vibration of a tuning fork still ringing in the next room. She had felt it once before, years ago. The Christmas Boone had come with 20 of his brothers, and she had felt the road before she heard it and had gone to the window before she knew why. The young one felt it first. His head came up. He turned toward the alley entrance with the involuntary attention of something that has heard movement in tall grass. Then it became sound, low and rolling and continuous like thunder that had decided to stay. It did not build the way a single engine builds. It arrived like weather arriving, not crashing, but advancing, filling the space between the buildings and the cold October air, until there was no room left in the alley for any other sound at all. Harlan Stokes dropped Ruth's wallet. He dropped it without looking down. Both hands suddenly emptied the $22 scattering on the asphalt. His eyes were fixed on the alley entrance, and his face had gone through several arrangements and had not yet settled on one. The first motorcycle came around the corner of the diner at a walk. Black. Heavy. The engine turning at idle, barely above silence, the particular sound of something large being held deliberately in check. Then another behind it. Then 4. Then 8. They filled the alley entrance 2 abreast and continued filling it, parking with the precision of men who had done this many times and needed no instruction. The sound did not diminish. It became a wall. Black leather, gray hair, hands that held history. On every back the same patch. Iron Road. And above the name, the same image Ruth had seen enough times to know it without looking directly at it. 44 motorcycles. The young one pressed his back against the red truck and stayed there. The man with the red beard stood frozen, one hand still holding Ruth's lipstick turned to stone mid-examination. Harlan Stokes stood in the center of the alley with George's medal in his fist and looked at what had come for him and understood, perhaps for the first time in years, that he had made a serious miscalculation about this day. The lead bike stopped 10 feet from Ruth's bench. The engine cut. One heavy leg came over the seat. The man who stood was 50 years old, built for something difficult, and still that shape long after the difficulty had changed form. Gray in the temples and throughout the beard pulled back. A face that did not advertise what it held. Above the iron road patch, a single word in the smaller letters, President. He did not look at Harlan Stokes. He walked to his mother. He lowered himself to one knee in front of her bench in the gravel, without any apparent concern for the gravel, or the leather, or the 43 men watching him, and he brought himself to her eye level and looked at her face. He looked at the red mark at her throat. He looked at the broken chain resting against the outside of her blouse, the 2 ends of it hanging loose. He looked at her hands, which were still folded in her lap, which had not unfolded once since she sat down. Then he looked at her eyes. "Mama," he said. His voice was quiet enough that the men behind him could not hear it. "You all right?" Ruth looked at her son. She looked at the lines on his face, which were more than they had been at Christmas. She looked at the gray in his beard. She looked at his hands, taking both of hers, and on his left wrist, where the jacket sleeve had ridden up in the kneeling, she saw the tattoo. A name. Danny. She had not seen it before. Or she had seen it and never asked. The letters were plain and dark and not decorative, the kind of tattoo a man gets, not because he wants something beautiful, but because he needs something permanent. She looked at it for one moment and said nothing. She would ask later. She already knew she would ask later, and she already suspected she knew the answer. and she held it for now and looked up at her son. "I am all right now, Boone," she said. He held her hands. Then he kissed her forehead. Then he stood up and turned around and, for the first time, looked directly at Harlan Stokes, and whatever Harlan Stokes found in that look was sufficient to make him take one involuntary step backward without having decided to. The alley was very still. 44 engines ticked and cooled. No one moved. No one spoke. Behind Ruth, near the third row of motorcycles, stood a man with wire-rimmed glasses that looked entirely out of place against the leather and the road dust, sat on his bike and watched Harlan Stokes with a particular quality of attention. Not assessing a threat, confirming a recognition. The expression of a man searching a name he already knows. Boone held out his open palm toward Harlan Stokes. He said one word. "Now." Harlan Stokes' fingers opened, not because he chose to open them, because his hand stopped working the way it had been working, the way a machine stops when the power's cut. The metal fell into Boone's palm and Harlan's arm dropped to his side, and he stood in the October alley, looking at a man who had not raised his voice or his hands or done anything except kneel in gravel and speak a single word. And this was the most frightening thing Harlan Stokes had encountered in a considerable lifetime of frightening things. Boone looked at the metal. He turned it once in his palm. He looked at the back of it. The name, the date. He closed his fingers around it with the careful pressure of a man holding something he is afraid of dropping, and he walked back to Ruth on the bench and lowered himself to one knee again and placed the metal in her lap with both hands, setting it down as though it were the most fragile object in the county. He said, "I will have this fixed by sundown. Stronger chain." Ruth looked at the metal in her lap. She ran her thumb across the face of it. The edges of the star, the slight raised texture of the lettering, the way she had done 1,000 times on 1,000 mornings. Then she looked at her son. "Your father," she said, "would have been proud of the man you became." Boone's jaw moved once. Something came into his eyes for exactly 1 second, and then it was gone, and his face was composed again, and he stood. He turned to the man with the wire-rimmed glasses who had dismounted and was standing 3 bikes back from the front. Boone looked at him. The man with the glasses was already looking at Harlan Stokes with the focused attention of someone who is not deciding whether he recognizes something, but confirming that he does. He pulled Boone aside by the sleeve. 2 steps. Low voice. "I know this man," he said. "The real name is Harlan Stokes. I ran a file on him 4 years back in connection with a bail arrangement out of Dauphin County. It was a complicated arrangement. It involved a sitting sheriff." Boone looked at him. The man with the glasses said the name. Cord Prentice. Boone looked back at Harlan Stokes standing in the center of the alley with 44 motorcycles arranged around him, and something shifted in the way Boone was looking at him. Not more anger, more information. The adjustment a man makes when a picture he thought he understood reveals a second image hidden in the same lines. He said nothing yet. He walked back to the center of the alley and pointed at the wooden bench beside his mother. He pointed at the 3 men. "Sit," he said. Harlan sat first because the other 2 were watching him for direction, and he had nothing left to give them. The man with the red beard sat beside him. The young one sat last with his elbows on his knees and his face aimed at the ground like a man in a waiting room, hoping not to be called. Boone turned to his right. The man he spoke to was tall and broad, a former Marine who had been his vice president for 11 years. "Call state troopers," Boone said. "Not county. State. Tell them we have 3 individuals who assaulted a 78-year-old woman in broad daylight, and we have it on video, and we will wait with them until the troopers arrive." The man already had his phone out. Boone looked at Dex Briggs, who had come out of the back door of the diner at some point during this, and was standing by the door with his cook's apron on and his phone in one hand. Their eyes met. Dex gave one short nod. The video. Everything. The 3 men on the bench said nothing for a moment. Then Harlan Stokes tried. He said, "Look, we did not know who she was. We were not meaning to. We were just passing through, and we saw her, and we had been drinking, and we did not." Boone raised one hand. Harlan Stokes stopped talking so fast his teeth clicked together. The alley held its quiet. Ruth sat on her bench and held the metal in both hands and did not look at the 3 men. She was thinking the way she was always thinking, some part of her mind running a separate calculation beneath everything else. The habit of a woman who had managed rooms full of 10-year-olds for 4 decades and had learned that the moment you stopped thinking was the moment something went sideways. She stood up. No one was watching her. Boone was speaking in a low voice to his vice president. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses stood apart from the group, with his arms folded, looking at nothing in particular, which she recognized as the expression of someone thinking at full capacity. The three men on the bench were studying the asphalt. 43 other men stood at intervals through the lot with the settled patience of people who were very good at being still. Ruth walked to the back door of Sullivan's Diner and went inside. The kitchen was warm and smelled of gravy and the long accumulated heat of a room that had had its ovens running since 6 in the morning. Dex came in behind her a few seconds later and let the door close and stood in the middle of his own kitchen and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something for long enough that the carrying has started to look like his natural posture. Ruth looked at him. Harlan was not here by accident, she said. Was he Dex? Not a question. She had learned long ago that the surest way to get a straight answer was to arrive at the question already holding part of it. Children knew when you were fishing. Adults were no different. Dex was quiet. You are on a witness list, Ruth said. Somewhere. That is why this man came to this town. That is why he was in that alley. Dex let out a long, slow breath and looked at the ceiling and then at the floor, and then at Ruth, who had not moved and was not going to move until he answered. 4 weeks, he said. I received a letter from a federal prosecutor's office in Nashville. They are building a case against Cord Prentice and 2 other county officials. Construction contracts. Money that moved to places it should not have moved back when I was keeping books for a company called Riverfield Development. I was their accountant for 3 years. I knew something was wrong and I left, and I believed that was the end of it. He stopped. Ruth waited. They found me anyway, Dex said. They want me to testify. I told them I would think about it. I have been thinking about it. And then 3 weeks ago, Lassiter started coming in for coffee more than he used to, and I started seeing a truck I did not recognize parked on Main Street on 2 different mornings, and I thought maybe I was being careful and maybe I was being paranoid. I did not want to worry you. Ruth was quiet for a moment. You were being careful, she said, and you were not being paranoid, and you should have told me. Dex looked at her. He was a large man, and he looked in this moment remarkably like the 10-year-old boy who had sat in the 3rd row of her classroom and received a C- he had deserved and known he deserved. Yes, ma'am, he said. Ruth turned and walked back out into the alley. Boone was standing near his motorcycle, speaking quietly with the man who wore glasses. She came up beside him and said his name, and he turned and she told him what Dex had told her in 9 sentences, without preamble and without extra color, the way she had always communicated what mattered. Boone listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet a moment. Then he looked at the man with the glasses who had been listening as well. The man with the glasses said, "That confirms what I suspected. Stokes was not here for the wallet. He was here to establish presence, make Briggs nervous enough to reconsider his cooperation with the federal case, or to make something more serious happen if nervousness was not sufficient." Boone looked at his mother. Ruth held his eyes and said nothing further. She had said what she needed to say. The rest was his to carry, and she had always known when the rest was his to carry. He nodded once. Then he turned to the man with the glasses and said, "Get everything you have on Stokes and on Prentice to the federal prosecutor's office in Nashville tonight. Everything you can connect. And to his vice president, when the troopers arrive, we give them all of it." The state troopers came 14 minutes later in 2 vehicles, moving carefully, because 2 vehicles of state troopers approaching an alley with 44 motorcycles in it will always move carefully. Boone walked out to meet them with both hands open at his sides before they were fully stopped. The lead trooper was a woman named Sergeant Linda Voss, 52 years old with short gray hair, and the measured manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped being surprised by the configurations that human difficulty produced. She looked at Boone. She looked at his patches. She looked at the 3 men on the bench and at the footage Dex held out on his phone and at the marks on Ruth's throat, which a second trooper photographed under a portable light. She said, "Sir, step back, please. I will take it from here." Boone stepped back. The troopers worked efficiently. Statements, photographs, the metal bagged and logged and returned to Ruth's hands within 4 minutes, which Ruth noted. They cuffed the 3 men. Harlan stared at the ground. The one with the red beard asked twice about a lawyer and was told twice he was welcome to one. The young one said nothing and went without struggle, And Ruth thought with the optimism that 41 years of teaching had not entirely extinguished that he was perhaps not entirely beyond the point of becoming something better than what he was today. Dex came out of the back door carrying a plate wrapped in foil and a paper cup with a lid. He sat beside Ruth on the bench and put them in her lap without asking. Cold meatloaf, coffee, 3 sugars. She ate and did not care about the temperature. I should have come out sooner, Dex said. When it was happening, I should have come out instead of calling. Ruth looked at him. You made the call that mattered, she said. Your hands made the right call. Dex pressed his lips together. His eyes were bright for a moment. Then he went inside and came back with a second coffee and sat back down, and they watched the troopers finish their work together in the silence of people who have known each other for 50 years and know when silence is what is needed. The county cruiser appeared at the mouth of the alley again. Lassiter had come back around. His vehicle sat at the entrance with the engine running, and through the windshield, Ruth could make out the outline she had known since he was 10 years old. He was not getting out. Boone had turned and was looking at him, not moving toward the cruiser, just standing and looking with the steadiness of a man who wants it understood that he has seen what he has seen and will not be pretending otherwise. Lassiter sat for a moment that seemed longer than it was. Then he put the cruiser in reverse and backed out of the alley entrance and was gone. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses who had been watching from beside his motorcycle reached into his saddlebag and removed a document folder. He had assembled it that afternoon before riding out because he was the kind of man who assembled things before he arrived at the situations. Timestamp records from the county dispatch log, a copy of Lassiter's patrol schedule, a screenshot of text messages between a number registered to Lassiter and a number registered to Harlan Stokes sent 3 days prior. He held the folder and did not open it yet. He would need it Thursday morning. The troopers loaded the 3 men into the back of their vehicles. Harlan Stokes looked at Boone one last time before the door closed. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He had nothing left to say, and the door closed, and the cruiser drove away, and the alley was quieter than it had been since before noon. Sergeant Voss came to where Boone stood, and they spoke briefly with the directness of professionals who did not need formality between them. Before she walked away, she crossed to Ruth's bench. Mrs. Calloway, she said, I want you to know we take this seriously. Ruth looked up at her. I know you do, she said. Thank you for coming quickly. Voss nodded and started to turn, then stopped. She said, the medal. Is it all right? Ruth held it up in the late afternoon light. Silver caught the sun cleanly. She could see a distorted reflection of herself in its face, small and unclear. An old woman in an alley in Tennessee, holding something that had been through Korea and back, and 54 years of a marriage, and 11 years of widowhood, in one October afternoon, and was still here. It is fine, she said. Thank you. After the troopers left and the alley had settled, Boone came and sat beside his mother on the bench. Not close enough to crowd. Close enough. He said nothing for a while. The light was going. The brick across the alley had gone from gold to rust. Above the roofline, the maple trees had turned the color of old pennies against the October sky. Then he said, Mama, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me straight. Ruth looked at him. How many other times, he said, has somebody put hands on you in this town? Ruth looked at the medal in her lap. The alley was quiet. The engines had cooled entirely now, and there was only the October evening settling around them and the distant sound of Main Street continuing with its ordinary business. There was a man at the grocery store, she said. Last winter, he pushed his cart into me. I am not certain it was deliberate. I thought it might have been. Boone was very still. There was a man at the post office in April. He used a word I will not repeat. She paused. And 3 mornings last month, she said there were beer cans in the front yard. One had rolled against the porch step. The smell of it was still there when I came back from church. She was quiet. I did not tell you, she said, because I did not want to be the reason you came home and broke the promise I asked you to keep. Boone looked at the ground between his boots for a long time. Somewhere behind them, among the parked motorcycles of boot-scraped asphalt, the sound of men standing still and keeping themselves that way. Boone looked up. He looked at the men around him, the ones who had been close enough to hear. Some had moved forward by a step without deciding to the ways people move toward things that have claimed their attention. All of them were watching him with the complete focus of people waiting to understand what is needed. Brothers, Boone said. His voice carried without effort through the alley. We are going to be in this town for a few days. A low sound moved through the group, not words. Agreement has a sound that requires none. He gave instructions to 3 men by name and 2 more by look alone. The post office on Birch, the grocery store on Main, a gas station on Route 9 where a young man had said something last spring. No confrontations, no words unless words were required. Simple continued presence, the steady message of people who are paying attention and intend to keep paying attention. And somebody, Boone said, needs to find me Kurt Lassiter's home address. Quiet. His vice president said carefully, for what purpose? For a conversation, Boone said. On his porch, in the daylight, with Sergeant Voss's cruiser parked across the street. He is going to remember which side of the badge he is supposed to be standing on. And he is going to remember it in front of witnesses who can attest to the manner of the conversation. His vice president nodded. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses said, when he remembers it, he is also going to be asked to cooperate with the federal case against Prentice. I can make clear to him on Thursday morning that a cooperative witness is in a considerably different position than a hostile one. Boone looked at his mother. Ruth had been sitting through all of this with the foil plate in her lap and the medal in her hand, watching her son organize what amounted to the quiet and methodical dismantling of the conditions that had allowed this afternoon to happen. She watched him the way she had always watched him, with the specific attention of a mother who knows her child completely and is still occasionally surprised by the adult he has become. She touched his sleeve. He looked at her. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Nobody gets hurt who does not deserve it. And nobody goes further than the law allows, not one step. Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Mama, I have not done anything that required a lawyer or an emergency room on someone else's account since before you last had to worry about it. I am not starting tonight over a Tuesday afternoon and a wallet with $11 in it. Good, Ruth said. She took a bite of the cold meatloaf. She finished half the plate and all the coffee and set them on the bench beside her. She held the medal up once more in the last of the afternoon light. Then she stood slowly and with care for her hip, and Boone stood with her and offered his arm, and she took it because she was 78 years old, and the gravel was uneven, and she saw no particular dignity in refusing help from her own son. They walked together out to the front of the diner. Her station wagon sat in the lot, intact. She noted this and was mildly grateful and mildly ashamed of the surprise. Boone opened the driver's door. Ruth stood beside it and looked at him and said, Where are you sleeping tonight? He looked at her. She said, The back bedroom has clean sheets. I changed them Saturday. He was quiet. She said, Unless you have grown too large for a twin mattress, which is possible. I have not grown too large, he said. Good. I will make eggs in the morning. She got in. She buckled her seatbelt. She placed the medal carefully in the cup holder where she could see it because the chain was broken and she did not yet trust a pocket with it. She started the engine. She lowered the window and looked at her son standing in the parking lot in the October dusk, and she thought about the boy who had handed his father nails one at a time in the summer of 1981. And she thought about the morning he had left, and she thought about the 43 years of Sundays between then and now. Boone, she said. He looked at her. Thank you for coming, she said. He put his palm on the roof of the car for one moment. Flat, a gesture without a name. Then he stepped back, and she drove down Sycamore Lane in the October dark with the medal in the cup holder catching the dashboard light the whole way home. And when she got inside, she went to the front door, and for the first time in 11 years, she did not turn the deadbolt. She was not sure she could have explained why to anyone who asked. She was not sure she needed to explain it. She simply left it and went to bed. The back bedroom smelled the same. Boone stood in the doorway before going in and let himself understand that. He had expected the flat, neutral air of a space that was maintained rather than lived in. Instead, it smelled like cedar and old paper and something underneath both that had no name other than home, unchanged in 32 years. The way certain things are unchanged, not through preservation, but through the deeper permanence of what they are. The model airplane still hung from the ceiling on a length of fishing line, a B-17 he had assembled with his father over 3 Saturday afternoons in the winter of 1985. His father had held the fuselage while Boone applied the glue, and neither of them had said much because the work did not require it. The plane turned very slowly in the air, disturbed by the opening door 1 degree, then back. The poster on the wall had curled away from its bottom corners, the tape long since dried out, but it was still there. A Harley-Davidson Knucklehead 1947 three-quarter profile against a white background. He had put it up when he was 15. His father had looked at it once, said nothing, and that had been the entirety of that. The bed had clean sheets with a narrow blue border. She had changed them on Saturday. She had not known he was coming. She had changed them anyway. He sat on the edge of the mattress and unlaced his boots and lay back on top of the covers without getting under them. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about Harlan Stokes sitting in the alley with 44 motorcycles arranged around him, the specific quality of that stillness, the way a man goes quiet when he finally understands the room has changed entirely, and the change is permanent. He thought about what was in the folder and what would happen to it in Nashville, and whether it would be enough. He thought it would be enough. He thought about Cord Prentice, who was at this moment presumably in his office or his home, not yet knowing that his Thursday had already been scheduled for him. He thought about his mother driving home alone with the medal in the cup holder, her hands at 10 and 2. He lay still for a while. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. He held it above his face in the dark. He scrolled. He knew exactly where the contact was. He had known where it was for 16 years, the way you know where a scar is without having to look for it. Danny. The number had been out of service since 2008. He had tried calling it once a few months after, outside a roadhouse in West Virginia late at night, not because he thought anyone would answer, but because he needed to do something with the weight of it, and the only thing he could think of was to dial. A recording had told him the number was no longer in service. He had not deleted the contact. Danny Briggs had been 17 years old in the spring of 2008. He had been Dex's boy, which meant he had been around Boone's whole life in the background, way that children of your parents' friends are always in the background, present, at holidays and gatherings known without being fully known. A quiet kid with a talent for engines. By 14, he could diagnose a problem by sound alone, and Boone had told him once sincerely that it was a gift, and Danny had looked at the ground and smiled the way people smile when they believe a thing is true but have not been told it enough to trust it yet. Boone had been in Nashville the night Danny called the clubhouse. He had been riding back from a meeting with a chapter south of the city. His phone was in the saddlebag. The charging cable he had meant to buy in Cookeville and had forgotten was still on his mental list of things to do. The phone died somewhere on I-40. Small things. The next morning, Dex had called from the diner phone, his voice entirely flat, in the way that voices go flat when the person speaking has not yet processed what they are saying, and Boone had pulled over on the highway shoulder and sat on the bike in the morning, cold, and listened. He had the name tattooed on his wrist within the month. Not as punishment. He had thought about it long enough to be honest with himself about why. Not as punishment, but as a reminder of what he was building and what it was for, so that on the days when the building was difficult or the rule that no one rides alone seemed like more than the structure could hold, he could look down and remember exactly what the alternative looked like. He lay in his mother's house in the back bedroom and looked at Danny Briggs's phone number on the screen above his face. He looked at it for a long time. Then he pressed delete. He held his thumb over the confirmation for a moment. Not because he was uncertain, because the gesture deserved a second of real attention, the small ceremony of something being done on purpose. He confirmed. The contact was gone. Not because 16 years had made it mean less, because the meaning had finally found its right form. What he had built in 16 years, the 44 men sleeping in the motel on Route 9 a mile from here, the rule that nobody goes through anything alone, the structure that had held enough weight, now that he believed it would hold more, that was where Danny Briggs lived now. Not in a phone number that rang into silence, in something that answered. He set the phone face down on the nightstand on top of a paperback Western that had been sitting there since at least 1990, and he closed his eyes. He slept without dreaming. In the morning, Ruth made eggs, scrambled with sharp cheddar the way she had made them his entire childhood. Toast with butter and blackberry preserves she put up every August from the canes along the back fence. Coffee black because he had never taken anything in his coffee, and she had never forgotten this. He came into the kitchen at 6:45, and she was at the stove, and the 2 cups were already on the table. He sat in his usual chair, the one on the right with the slightly loose leg George had never gotten around to tightening, and he looked at the cup on the other side of the table, the way he looked at it every Christmas morning. His mother set his plate in front of him and sat down across from him, and they ate together and did not speak for a while because they were people who understood that the presence of another person at a table is its own kind of conversation. Outside the kitchen window, the maple had gone fully red. The October light came through it amber and warm. After a while, he set down his fork and said, "Mama, I want to tell you something." She looked up from her plate. He said, "When I built Iron Road, I told the brothers there was one rule above everything else." He paused. "Nobody rides alone, not on the road and not through anything else either. You check in, you answer when someone checks in on you. If someone goes quiet, you go find out why." That was the rule from the first year and every year since. Ruth was looking at him. He said, "I built it because of Danny. I built it because I thought if there had been a real structure, people actually paying attention on purpose, he would have had somewhere to go when the night got bad enough." That was what I told myself. He looked at the table between them. "But the truth," he said, "the thing I did not say out loud for a long time was that I also built it because I needed it. Because I came back from overseas and I did not know how to be a person who was home, and the road made sense when nothing else did, and the brothers made sense, and having a rule that nobody goes alone meant that I was not going alone either, even on the nights when I told myself I was." He looked up. "I deleted the number last night," he said. "Danny's number." Ruth was very still. "Not because I forgot him," Boone said. "Not because it stopped meaning something. Because I think the keeping of it had stopped being about him and started being about me, about the keeping itself, and Danny deserved better than to be someone's guilt. He was a good kid. He was funny. He could fix any engine you put in front of him. He deserved to be remembered that way, and not as the night my phone was dead." The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the maple stood in the morning light, and the yard was still, and the house around them held the particular silence of a place that has been inhabited long enough to have absorbed the presence of everyone who ever lived inside it. Ruth said, "Your father kept a list." Boone looked at her. "In the back of his address book," she said, "a list of names. I found it after he died when I was going through his things. 12 names. Some were men from his unit in Korea. Others I did not recognize. I asked Dex about 2 of them. He said they were men who had not come back the same way George had men who had struggled and been lost." She paused. "I asked George once, before he died, what the list was for. He said it was so he would not forget to carry them. He said carrying them was the least a man could do for the ones he could not do more for." She looked at her son. "You are very like him," she said, "in all the ways that matter." Boone looked at the plate in front of him. "I know," he said. "Not the way a person says it, meaning thank you. The way a person says it, meaning I have always known this, and it is the thing I have tried hardest to be worth." Wednesday, they fixed the porch step. The 3rd step from the bottom had been giving slightly underfoot since spring, the wood not yet dangerous, but moving in that direction. Boone had noticed it arriving the night before, the subtle softness under his boot, and said nothing. After breakfast, he drove to the hardware store on Main and bought the right lumber and the right screws, and spent 2 hours on his knees in the October sun replacing the board, while Ruth sat in the porch swing and read, and occasionally noted observations about his technique that were accurate. His vice president, Sutter, came by mid-morning and helped without being asked because Sutter had grown up building things and could not watch building done without lending his hands to it. 3 men from the chapter sat on motorcycles at the end of the driveway, not watching for anything specific. Simply present the way a locked door is present, communicating nothing more complicated than the fact that someone is paying attention. The hardware store owner had been notably polite when Boone came in for the lumber. More polite than the transaction required. Boone had thanked him and meant it and said nothing else. Wednesday afternoon, Sutter and 2 others walked through the grocery store on Main Street and bought a bag of apples and a carton of orange juice, and were courteous to everyone they encountered, and the manager of the store watched them from the back of his and drew the conclusions available to him. The man at the gas station on Route 9 who had said something to Ruth in the spring did not need to be visited because by Wednesday evening he had heard enough from the rest of the town to come to Ruth's house on Sycamore Lane with his hat in his hands and knock on the front door. Ruth answered and listened to him and said, "I accept that," and closed the door, and that was sufficient for her purposes. Thursday morning they went to see Lassiter. Boone and the man with the wire-rimmed glasses and Sutter drove in Sutter's truck because this was not a situation that would benefit from the arrival of motorcycles. They parked on the street in front of a small ranch house in a subdivision off Route 9 beige with brown shutters, a child's red bicycle tipped on its side in the driveway. Sergeant Voss's state cruiser was already parked 2 houses down. She had agreed to be present as an observer. She had not asked for details about what would be said, and Boone had not offered them because they both understood what was needed and what it was for. Boone knocked. Lassiter came to the door in his county uniform, which meant either he was about to leave for work or he wanted the armor of it. He looked at Boone. He looked past Boone at the 2 men behind him. He looked at Voss's cruiser down the block. His face went through several arrangements in rapid succession and did not settle cleanly on any of them. He said he could not speak without his union representative. Boone said, "You are not being spoken to as a law enforcement officer right now. You are being spoken to as a man who was in a specific alley on Tuesday afternoon and made a specific choice." Lassiter said nothing. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward and set the folder on the porch railing. He did not open it. He said, "This contains your dispatch log from Tuesday showing your assigned area and your patrol time. It contains records of communications between you and Harlan Stokes going back 14 months. It contains documentation that connects your relationship with Stokes to a broader arrangement involving Sheriff Cord Prentice and a federal investigation that has been open for 11 months. Lassiter looked at the folder. "This goes to Sergeant Voss this afternoon," Boone said. "That part is not a variable. The only thing you control right now is what you do between now and then. Whether you call the federal prosecutor's office in Nashville this morning and tell them what you know about Cord Prentice and Riverfield development and what you were asked to do and by whom. Whether the people in your life hear about this in a way that gives you any ground to stand on afterward or in a way that gives you none." He paused. "You were in my mother's 5th grade class," he said. "She gave you a D in conduct 2 years running. She wrote on your report card that you were capable of much more than you currently chose. I know that because she kept every report card she ever wrote, 41 years of them, in a box in the hallway closet. She wrote that about you specifically. She believed it when she wrote it." Lassiter's jaw tightened. "She still believes it," Boone said. "I have no opinion, but I am giving you the chance to be right about one of us." He stepped back from the door and walked to the truck. Sutter followed. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses set one hand briefly on top of the folder, a gesture of confirmation, and followed. They drove to the motel on Route 9 and Boone sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the wall and waited. The call came at 11:42. The man with the wire-rimmed glasses appeared at Boone's door 13 minutes later. Lassiter had called the federal prosecutor's office in Nashville. He had asked for the duty attorney. He had been on the phone for 51 minutes. Boone nodded and said nothing. The folder went to Sergeant Voss that afternoon as promised, because that had been stated, and a stated thing was a kept thing. Lassiter was placed on administrative leave by Friday. By the following Monday, he was no longer employed by Dauphin County. By the Monday after that, the ranch house with the brown shutters had a real estate sign in the front yard, and the red bicycle was gone from the driveway, and the family that had lived there was 3 states away before the listing had its first showing. No one laid a hand on Kurt Lassiter. No one needed to. Harlan Stokes appeared before a federal magistrate on Thursday of the same week. He had violated the conditions of an existing bail arrangement in Georgia by crossing state lines without authorization and accruing new charges in Tennessee. He was held without bail. The 2 men who had been with him in the alley had both provided full statements, the younger one at length and with what the prosecutor's office described in internal notes as genuine remorse, and both received reduced charges in exchange for their cooperation. The investigation into Cord Prentice and Riverfield development had been accumulating material for 11 months. It was moving carefully the way federal investigations move when they are building toward something that will hold. The documentation that arrived from Nashville on Tuesday night accelerated things considerably because connecting a sitting sheriff to the intimidation of a federal witness is a different category of problem than financial irregularities in construction contracts, and the prosecutor's office understood the difference. Prentice was contacted by federal investigators on Friday morning. He retained a lawyer by Friday afternoon. He resigned as sheriff of Dauphin County on the following Wednesday. The indictment came 6 weeks later on a Tuesday morning in November. Ruth heard about it from Dex, who called from the diner's landline at 8:15 in the morning while she was standing at her kitchen counter with her first cup of coffee. Dex told her what the indictment covered and what it meant, and she listened without interrupting. And when he finished, she said, "Good." Then she said, "Thank you for calling Dex." Then she said, "I will see you this Tuesday." And she hung up and finished her coffee and took the crossword from the table and went to sit in the porch swing in the October morning air. She sat for a while and let that settle into the correct place. Then she opened the crossword and filled in 4 squares and felt for the first time in some weeks that the town outside the porch railing was arranged in roughly the right order. Thursday of that same week, Dex Briggs drove to Nashville in his own truck in a clean shirt and his good shoes and sat in a conference room in a federal building and told a prosecutor everything he knew about Riverfield development and the money and the 3 years he had spent trying to convince himself that leaving was the same as being clean. He answered every question without hesitation, the way a man answers when he has been carrying a thing for a long time and has finally understood that the carrying was costing him more than the setting down ever would. He drove home to Millhaven and went directly to Sullivan's Diner and put on his apron and ran the dinner service because the line does not wait and has never waited. And Dex Briggs had understood this about the line for 36 years. Thursday was also the day Sutter and 2 others went up on Ruth's roof with the materials Boone had purchased Wednesday evening and replaced the shingles on the northeast corner that had been lifting since the spring ice storm. The job took most of the morning. Ruth brought them coffee twice and did not comment on the technique, which Sutter noted and appreciated. Friday afternoon, Boone and Sutter and a man named Creel, who had spent 30 years as a mechanic, pulled the station wagon into Sullivan's parking lot and changed the battery and washed every surface and checked the fluids and the tire pressure and the brake lines. They left it exactly where it had been facing out. Boone had heard it hesitate when Ruth started it Thursday morning and had said nothing to her about it at the time. That Friday evening, Ruth made banana bread. The kitchen held the smell of it from 4 o'clock onward, and when Boone came in from the motel at 6, the smell met him at the door the way it had met him at the door his entire life. He took off his boots at the entrance and walked to the kitchen in his socks. Ruth cut 2 slices and set them on the plates that had belonged to her mother, white with a blue band around the rim, used for 60 years, one small chip on the rim of Boone's that had been there since at least 1985. He looked at the chip, he looked at the kitchen, at the window, at the stove, at the 2 cups on the counter, one already poured. He sat down, they ate the bread and drank their coffee, and the kitchen was quiet and the maple outside the window was dark against the evening sky. Most of its leaves down now, the branches bare and black and clean. After a while, Boone set his cup down and said, "Come with me, Mama." She looked at him. "Out west," he said, "we have a house with a proper guest room and a garden that Carol has been meaning to plant for 2 years and has not gotten to because she is waiting for a real reason to. You would have people around you every day. I would know where you were. Nobody would push a cart into you in the winter." Ruth was quiet. She was quiet long enough that something shifted slightly in the air of the kitchen, the way air shifts when a conversation is about to become something other than what it started as. Then she looked at the kitchen around her, the window, the stove, the floor. "I gave birth to you in the back bedroom," she said. "Your father could not get the car out of the garage because the snow was too deep, and the ambulance could not get down Sycamore Lane for the same reason. So I gave birth to you on the old quilt your grandmother made in 1961, and your father held my hand and told me I was doing fine when I was not doing fine at all, and I have never loved him more than I did in that hour before or after." She paused. "I watched him die on this floor," she said, "the other side near the counter. He was trying to get a glass of water, and I heard the sound and I came in, and he was already down, and I held his head in my lap and talked to him until the ambulance arrived. And he looked at me the way he had looked at me for 43 years, and then he did not look at me anymore." Boone did not move. "I walked to him on Sunday morning," she said, "across the field behind the yard and through the iron gate and down the 3rd row to the stone with the maple leaf on it that you chose because you remembered he liked trees. I walked there last Sunday. I will walk there this Sunday. I cannot do that from out west, Boone." Boone looked at his plate. "I know," he said. "I knew the answer before I asked." "Then why did you ask?" "Because I need to hear you say it," he said. Because every time I leave here, I need to know the specific reason, so I have something to hold on to when I am 2,000 miles away. And it is 3 in the morning, and I am thinking about beer cans in your front yard and a deputy who waved at the wrong man." Ruth looked at her son for a moment. "Once a month," she said, "you and some of the brothers. The guest room has a good mattress, and there is always banana bread." "Once a month," Boone said, "and no trouble on my porch, no trouble on your porch. I gave you that promise 32 years ago, and I am not revisiting it now." Ruth nodded. She picked up her cup. She looked at him over the rim of it with the expression he had known since childhood, the one that held everything a smile held, without quite being one. "Good," she said. "Your slice is getting cold." He stayed one more night. He slept in the back bedroom under the Model B-17 and the curling knucklehead poster, and slept as he had slept the night before without dreaming the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a man who has set something down that he has been carrying a long time and discovered that the setting down did not make him smaller. In the morning, she made oatmeal because Saturday was oatmeal with raisins, because she said they were good for him, and he ate it as he had always eaten it without complaint, because some arguments are not worth the effort and some things are worth accepting because of what they mean about where you are and who made it. He helped wash the dishes. He dried them and handed them to her, and she put them in the right cabinets because she had always been the one who put the dishes away, and this had never been negotiated and was not going to be negotiated now. At 9 o'clock, he put on his jacket. Ruth stood on the porch in her tan coat with the worn hem. The October morning was cold and clear, the kind of clear that follows a week of unsettled weather. The air scrubbed back to its essential elements. The maple at the end of the yard stood bare and black against a sky that was the specific blue of late autumn in Tennessee, a color he had been seeing in his memory every time he missed this place for 32 years. He kissed her forehead. The same spot, the same pressure. The language of a gesture performed enough times to have become a language. She reached up and put her palm against his face, just for a moment, just her palm. Then she stepped back. He walked to his bike. 44 engines started behind him, one and then all of them, at once, the sound building up from the curb and rolling off the houses and the bare trees and the clear morning sky. He sat on the bike and looked at his mother, standing on her porch in her tan coat. And he looked at her for a long moment and committed the image of it, the way you commit something to a place you will not lose it. He raised one hand. Ruth raised one hand back. He turned out of Sycamore Lane, and 43 engines followed him, and the sound of it filled the street and spread through the neighborhood and then rose above the roof lines and thinned until it was gone, and there was only the Saturday morning left behind. Ruth stood on the porch and listened until there was nothing left to listen to. Then she went inside. She stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. She picked up the second cup, George's cup, which she had filled from habit this morning and not touched. She looked at it. She held it in both hands and felt the weight of it and the warmth of it and let herself understand what it had meant for 11 years, the filling of it, the setting of it out, the not drinking it, the keeping of the shape of a morning that had ended. She poured it out. She rinsed it. She dried it with the dish towel and set it in the cabinet on its shelf next to her own cup touching. She stood at the counter. Then she poured a single fresh cup. Hot. No sugar. She carried it to the table and sat down and looked at the one cup in front of her and the empty space on the other side of the table, and she let both of those things be exactly what they were. She picked up her crossword. She uncapped her blue pen. The metal hung at her collarbone on the new chain, thicker than the old, one the clasp soldered permanently shut. She felt it settle into place and felt its familiar weight, and thought about George's hand setting it there in the lamplight in 1970, and she held that thought for one quiet moment. Then she began the crossword. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in November, she heard them before she saw them. She was at the kitchen counter with her first cup when the frequency arrived beneath the sound, the vibration in the soles of her feet and the base of her chest that she had come to recognize as its own kind of language, and she went to the kitchen window and looked out at Sycamore Lane. 44 motorcycles came down the street 2 by 2 in the gray November morning, light chrome holding whatever sun there was, moving at a walking pace. They pulled to the curb in front of the White House and stopped, and the engines cut one by one until there was just the November morning and the smell of cold air and the stillness of a street that had just been filled. Ruth looked at the counter. She looked at the single cup in front of her. She thought about Boone's voice on the phone 3 weeks ago, once a month, and about the way he had held her hands in the alley, and about the model airplane still hanging in the back bedroom on the same length of fishing line. She got down a second cup from the cabinet. She filled it. She carried both cups to the front porch and set them on the railing and leaned in the doorframe and looked out at the street where her son was dismounting from his bike and walking toward the porch steps, the third one from the bottom, solid and sound under his boot. Good lumber, that would hold through another 10 winters, at least. He came up the steps and stopped when he saw the two cups on the railing. He looked at them, he looked at his mother. She handed him the second cup without a word, and he took it, and they stood on the porch together in the November morning and drank their coffee and looked out at the street full of motorcycles and at the bare maple and at the skein behind them through the screen door. The house smelled like cedar and recent baking, and the crossword was on the kitchen table with 4 squares already filled in, and the metal was warm against her collarbone where it had always been and where it would remain. The morning was what it was, which was enough, which had always in the end been enough.